Hello YouTube. Today I'll tell you about the Dyatlov Pass murders. It's a mystery that's now known to people in the West through movies and books. I've begun my research over 20 years ago, and my initial account was published in the book The Soviet UFO Files, when almost no one knew about it in the West. I've done my own research, I have my own conclusions, and I'll tell you what I know about this very unusual case that took place in the Ural Mountains in 1959. This murder mystery remains unsolved, although top Russian ufologists use their brain power to get the answers. The date was February 2nd, 1959. 10 experienced, well-trained mountaineers left the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg. Igor Dyatlov led the team, and their destination was the Ural Mountains. The names were Igor Dyatlov, Zionida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kalivatov, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Krivonishenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibaut Brignoles, Alexander Zolotaryov, Yuri Yudin. 9 of them perished under most unusual circumstances, and one was too ill to continue, and he stayed behind. Soviet criminal police conducted a fruitless investigation, only to report that, and I'm quoting, an invincible force of nature caused the tragedy. Khalat Sakel is a snow-covered mountain summit, and the name translates as Mountain of the Dead in the language of the Mansi tribe, natives who worship the place as a sacred area where spirits congregate. It was there, in the rugged, desolate area that a search and rescue team found a tent clearly abandoned in a hurry because its flaps were cut out with knives to allow a hasty, panicky escape to those inside. Investigators found footprints leading from the tent down the slope, and not very far away from the same tent, at various distances from it, corpses too were discovered. One mountaineer died from exposure. The rest, as was determined by investigators, died of numerous bodily injuries of unknown nature. Today, there is a memorial plaque fixed to the rocks at Pass 1079, now renamed Dyatlov Pass. This is where the tragic events unfolded that cold February day in 1959. Dyatlov's body was lying 300 meters away from the main group. He crawled to the tent and died. There were no injuries on his body. Another body was found closer to the tent. When that corpse was autopsied, the doctors found cracks in his skull. The horrible blow was inflicted without any damage to the skin. The female member of the expedition was the closest to the tent. She was lying face down, and the snow beneath her was colored by blood, but no signs of violence were found on her body. The 3 corpses found at a distance from the campfire presented the largest mystery. They died from horrible injuries. Their ribs were broken, heads smashed in, internal bleeding in each body. But how could they sustain internal injuries with their skin intact? Vadim Chernobrov, whom I mentioned before in my videos, and his research expedition were in the area in 1999, investigating the same case. They were able to uncover some interesting details. Mikhail Gerstein, the Russian UFO researcher, scientist, and writer, investigated the same case and reported that the last of the discovered young explorers died from exposure to cold temperature. He published his research in 1997 in St. Petersburg. It was also assumed, according to Gerstein, that something blinded those people. Chernobrov spoke to Maria Salter, one of the doctors assigned to the case. She actually remembered that there were 11 corpses and where the other two corpses came from, no one knew. The bodies were taken to the military hospital in the area, but one body was immediately transferred to Sverdlovsk. During the actual autopsy, a military official that was present pointed to her, and Maria Salter was told to leave the room. But she had to sign papers stating that she would not reveal any information. The victim's clothes contained increased levels of radiation, and the surrounding tree branches were scorched. Lukin, who was one of the criminologists, stated to Chernobrov that the character of the scorching was such as to indicate that a ray or some other powerful energy inflicted it. That energy was of unknown nature, but obviously it was directed because the snow did not melt and the trees in the area were not damaged. The corpses discovered at the site had an unnatural orange color. The strange orange color of the bodies was attributed to radiation from a powerful, unfamiliar energy source, possibly an unidentified flying object, a UFO. Local residents told police investigators that at the time of the alleged murders, there had been sightings of noiseless orange spheres over the mountain. People in the northern Urals still discuss this case, still talk about it. There are rumors that the 10 stumbled upon the secrets of the so-called vacuum bombs. Vadim Chernobrov points out that no such weapon existed at the time. Researchers believed at that time that the tourists were simply killed because they witnessed, albeit inadvertently, tests of secret weapons. However, according to Maria Salter, the color of the corpses was no different from other corpses. Who colored the bodies? And as the years went by and rumors did not die down, people wanted to know. For a while, there existed a hypothesis that missiles caused their deaths. A metal ring was discovered in the area where Dyatlov's mountaineers died. It was from a Soviet missile. Although reports of cited missiles in the area at the time were later turned over to Chernobrov's group, there was no official confirmation of any such tests. There were no rocket launches at the time. The Moscow Aviation Institute Kosmopoisk branch, that's Vadim Chernobrov's group, researched all available archives. I also looked at some other reports, and it's highly doubtful that the Soviets would spend money and efforts to fly missiles in such faraway area where they had much closer areas to test missiles in Russia than this desolate, faraway place. It's hard to describe to you what the area looks like, but it's very hard to get to. There are almost no people living in the area except for local tribes, and I'll tell you more as it relates to my hypothesis about that part of the Ural Mountains. Did the ill-fated tourists find something in the mountains that was obviously not for their eyes to see? Was this the laboratory related to the Soviet experiments of the 1940s? That's the alleged Pinkel saucer experiments I mentioned in my books. Or was there a find or observation related to the tragedies of the 1950s in the Ural Mountains? The criminologist mentioned above recalls that when he submitted facts of the case to the communist boss of the area, who was the first secretary of the regional committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Korolenko, the criminologist received immediate orders to classify the investigation as secret, bury the corpses in sealed off caskets, and inform their relatives that all mountaineers died from exposure to cold temperature. There were other strange deaths in the area, and I've read about them. And Those, by the way, who had investigated the case also did not die peacefully. Vadim Chernobrov had eerie details of their deaths and descriptions of other strange incidents. And those who want to learn more detail from him, I will tell them how to contact Vadim Chernobrov about his hypothesis and his findings. What's important is that the UFO angle definitely was present in the investigation, and there were witnesses who reported strange aerial phenomena during the investigation of the unresolved murder case. Mikhail Gerstein also collected such reports. Among them, there is one about the sighting of a large fiery circle that followed one of the rescue teams that came after the bodies were discovered. Followed for 20 minutes. Valentina Tokaryova responded to the 2004 article about this case in the Russian media. The article was published by Argumenty and Fakty newspaper. Tokaryova, too, was a mountaineer, mountain explorer, and in one expedition in the area of the Northern Urals in 1958, she and her team members almost perished. One of her colleagues was Rustem Slobodin, the future member of the Dyatlov team that perished in February of 1959. Tokaryova kept letters from the Dyatlov team members from 1959. She said that they were intelligent, decent, and honest young people. She was invited to join the expedition and the team, but the factory where Tokaryova worked did not approve her vacation plans. When she learned of the demise of the team, she was not allowed to attend the funeral. She was told not to get involved in this case and not to show the letters to anyone. Tokaryova is completely against the hypothesis that Mansi people murdered the young mountain explorers. Tokaryova visited their settlement and recalls hospitality of the Mansi people. Vladimir Karatayev also responded to the same article in Argumenty and Fakty. Now, that's important. He was the first criminal investigator of the Dyatlov Pass tragedy. He was later a special investigator for the most important criminal cases of the prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation. Karatayev mentioned that the case was actually declassified, and many of the people who had been involved were still alive in 2004. There were documents that disappeared from the file that pertained to his investigation. Two local Mansi people stated that they observed an elongated object that was over the taiga, or dense forest. It had flame coming from the rear of the object. The account of the Mansi involvement in the tragedy, it was mentioned in the article, in the Argumenty and Fakty, surfaced when the torn tent of the Dyatlov team was discovered. Initially, the experts were convinced that the tent was cut up from the outside, not the inside. But later it was proven that the tent was cut up from the inside. That is why some local Mansi were tortured, actually, and they were forced to give statements. It was the local city official, Prodanov, according to investigator Karatayev, who claimed that the Mansi were guilty. Prodanov recalled the case when local Mansi allegedly drowned in the lake by Otterten Mountain a woman who wandered into their sacred grounds. Karatayev recalls vividly the time when the corpses of the perished Dyatlov team members were examined by medical experts. The bodies had no visible injuries, but the bones were horribly broken up. Nikolai Tibo's skull was literally flattened. After the autopsy, Karatayev and the experts were ordered basically to get into barrels of alcohol. He immediately informed the members of the government commission of the autopsy findings, and the commission at the time was getting drunk in Ust-Lazova. But no one had interest in the new information that he wanted to present. The commission was satisfied that the cause of death was due to freezing. Soon thereafter, Karatayev was removed from the investigation. Many years later, he was in touch with scientists from the Korolev and academician Rauschenbach teams. By the way, Rauschenbach was a prominent Soviet physicist and rocket engineer. He developed the theory of the instruments for interplanetary flight control and navigation in 1955 and 1960s. And Korolev was the father of the Soviet space science. The investigators was vaguely told that there were some tests at the time in the area, obviously missiles. Karatayev personally believes the missile version. Some years after the tragedy, one of the Mansi hunters discovered a strange metal article in the forest. It could have been one of the fragments. Karatayev states that there still have not been any serious search operations in the Dyatlov Pass area. He is certain that the fragments can be discovered there. One more hypothesis was reviewed by the investigators. According to this explanation, one of the reasons for the deaths of the Dyatlov Pass visitors could have been impact of very intensive infrasound. Infrasound is generated naturally, wind, waves and earthquakes, and by human activities. Low frequency sound is used by marine mammals to communicate over vast distances and by birds to determine migration patterns. Infrasound refers to sound vibrations that are at frequency too low to be heard by human ear. It's the audible range. Infrasound produces a range of bizarre effects in people, including anxiety, extreme sorrow, and chills. Since infrasound can affect people's whole bodies, it has been under significant investigation by military around the world, including the Soviet military establishment. Vladimir Gavro, a Russian-born French scientist, was one of the most notorious developers of such infrasonic weapons. In France, during 1957, against the background of the Cold War, Dr. Vladimir Gavro assembled a team of researchers in the electroacoustical laboratory in Marseille to look into the development of remote control systems and robotics. He noticed low frequency vibrations in his laboratory's new ventilation system. He noticed that it made people very ill, and Gavro concluded that ultrasound frequency sound waves could be used to create a sonic death ray. Gavro began to experiment with low frequency acoustics with the intention of creating a viable audio weapon for the French military. Several prototype designs of various sizes of weapons were produced, and they were dubbed Canon Sonique. Remarkably, in 1979, the Soviet Union submitted a document to the United Nations Committee on Disarmament, in which it listed some types of potential weapons of mass destruction, and among them an infrasonic acoustic radiation weapons that would utilize harmful effect of infrasonic oscillation on biocurrents of the brain and nervous system. The infrasound hypothesis about the Dyatlov Pass tragedy ties in with my investigation of the mysterious Golden Woman. In the mountains of northern Ural, there is a dome-shaped mountain covered with dense forest. The name is Manya Tumb. Mansi deer herders that lead cattle drives through the Urals did not dare approach the mountain. People who came too close became ill, anguished, and died. Old people warned that Sorny Aqua, the Golden Woman, inhabited the mountain. It was really too scary to come close to the mountain. The Golden Woman shrieked very hard People said that her voice was horrifying. A local legend tells the story of a female shaman who was punished by being petrified for trying to insult the Golden Woman. When the deity, as they call it, was crossing the Ural Mountains ridge, the shaman, as the mistress of the ridge, wanted to stop the deity. The Golden Woman responded with a terrible shriek. For many miles around, all living things fell dead from terror. The shaman fell flat on her back and turned to stone. There are still rumors in the area that horrible female shrieks can be heard, and they emanate from the sacred Black Mountain of Manya Tumb. Between the mountains Koip, means drum in Mansi, and Manya Tumb, there is another mountain, the tallest in the northern Urals. The mountain is named Otorten, and we already know what had occurred there in February of 1959. I found a very interesting description of the area and its legends in a Soviet book which was available online, maybe still is. It's called "Самый красивый Ural", Most Beautiful Urals, by Mikhail Zaplatin and Felix Wiebe. The book was published in Sverdlovsk, we already know that city, in 1983. Mikhail Zaplatin recalled his visit to the area of Manya Tuma in 1957. An old Mansi man showed the mountain to the author. I'll paraphrase his words. The Mansi said that a long time ago it was forbidden to go to the mountain. Those who did go there were ill for a long time, and then they died. The reason was the presence of the Sorny Aqua, or the Golden Woman. People were terrified to come close to the mountain, because the Golden Woman had a very powerful shriek. People said the shriek was horrifying. The old Mansi did go to the mountain just once, as a young man, but he didn't see anything out of place. But nowadays he would not go, as it is a sin, and he knew that he would die. One of the reasons for the deaths of the Dyatlov Pass visitors could have been the effects of a very intensive infrasound, if they stumbled on the lair of the Golden Woman. And I will tell you who the Golden Woman is according to my research in my future videos.